Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3, the Skaven, in particular Lord Skrolk. Quite a few people have the view that Lord Skrolk is one of the weakest legendary lords in the game, or one of the weakest Skaven legendary lords in the game at the very least. He has pros and cons, absolutely, and he does have a fairly difficult starting situation, but once you overcome that starting position, you'll be steamrolling the map in a way that the other Skaven Legendary Lords could only dream of. Honestly, the only one that compares to it would actually be Snitch, and Snitch is a paid DLC Lord, whereas Lord Skrolk was a baseline Legendary Lord for the Skaven, added at launch with Warhammer 2. But what are the pros, what are the cons? Why do people think he is so difficult? Well, his starting position certainly doesn't help him in any significant way. So he starts over here in Oxhill, and he does have the Sentinels of Time to deal with from the very start. And the Sentinels of Time, in particular in the Southern Sentinel Settlement, have a fairly powerful army and a powerful garrison. But here's the thing. Although that means your turn 2 battle, because you take the Sentinels of Time turn 1, you don't lose many men or anything like that, but that means his turn 2 battle is probably one of the most difficult early game battles. But you don't necessarily need to win it turn 2. What you can do, and what you should do, is use your artillery, because one of the big major advantages that Skrolk has, and this is very significant, not just early on, but for a lot of your game, is that he starts with 2 artillery units. And Plague Claws are some of the best artillery units actually in the entire game. They may not do the same kind of damage as some other pieces, but having this kind of artillery early on, they're devastating in siege battles. So what you do is you take Lord Skrolk's army, you recruit a bunch of clan rats at the Sentinels of Time. Turn 2, you'll be able to attack the Southern Sentinels, confront the main Lizardmen army that opposes you, and you may not be able to win that battle, especially on something like Legendary very hard, but what you can do is significantly weaken the defenders, and hell, if you play your cards right, you can even win it. So even if you don't win a turn 2, you'll win a turn 3, or the defenders may sally out. Depends on how much damage you do. But having those Plague Claws really helps with that, because they're quite capable of doing a lot of damage in a siege. Obviously, there's issues with AI dodging on higher difficulties and all that, but there are ways to obviously overcome that. Just present them bait, and you've got perfect bait. Clan Rats, Menace from Below. You've got the way to bait them into attacking certain units, blobbing up and presenting themselves as a perfect target to get annihilated by your powerful artillery. So that's the early game situation. Once you deal with that, you just sweep the rest of the province, and then even before that, you might want to go south and help Clan Scrat. And this is where Lord Skrolk's one of his biggest disadvantages can turn into a major advantage. Why do I say that? Well, one of his big issues is that he's surrounded by enemies. To the south, he's got Lizardmen, the Prophet faction of the Lizardmen. He's got High Elves. Further south, he's got Oxyotl. And if you take the southern tip, Oxyotl is almost certainly going to declare war on you and try and invade your territory. But by the time he arrives, he won't be able to stand up to multiple armies that you'll be having, because the Skaven can maintain multiple armies very quickly. They might not be great armies, but numbers actually do matter. They matter in Outresolve, they matter in the balance of power in the actual battles and all that. So they are significant. Oxyotl might have one of the best single armies in the game, but when you throw 2-3 armies at him, he's not going to be able to stand up to that, especially if you can ambush the ambusher, really, because that's one of the strategies you can use. But yeah, Oxyotl can be an issue. But here's the thing. If you manage to take the Prophet faction, then you can ally this Skaven faction. And one of the things to be said about Skaven factions, regardless of how good or bad the Skaven can be, and from my perspective, the Skavens are really horrible until you start getting into things like Night Runners, Rattling Gunners, Jezzails, etc. But with Clan Rats, they're really terrible, because Clan Rats are easily one of the worst early game units. Skaven Slaves also one of the worst units. They're not so cheap as to justify how horrible they are. But one of the things to be said about the Skaven is the AI, it's one of those factions, one of the very few factions, along with the High Elves and Dark Elves. Like, there are 3 factions the AI plays very well, or gives you a nightmare, really. And those are High Elves, Dark Elves, and Skaven. With High Elves and Dark Elves, though, it's more of a late game affair, or mid-late game affair, whereas with the Skaven, it's a roller coaster ride from beginning to end. So if you can save this clan Scratched over here, take down the Prophet faction, then you get yourself an ally that will be massing forces, legions of troops to fight your enemies. Like, look at these guys. They've got 2 stacks of troops here. Yes, it's Skaven slaves all around, sure, undeniably so, but all the same, it's like 3 stacks of Skaven slaves against the Tomb Kings here. Rokarth came to attack the mine, beat him back. I didn't manage to beat him back, but because raw numbers do matter. But you can save this faction, give them some territory, give them the Prophet's capital, make them a powerful ally, and then you also have Clan Spittle, who you can also ally. And Skrolk actually gets a decent enough diplomatic bonus for his special skill tree that gives him 10 diplomatic relations with the other Skaven factions. So I've been able to ally Clan Spittle as well. So what Skrolk has as a major advantage compared to every other Skaven Legendary Lord is that he has 2 other Skaven factions within striking distance. One of them may die early on, let's be clear. You might not be able to save the Skaven faction over here, but you can certainly ally Clan Spittle, so at least you will have one powerful and reliable ally. It goes a bit against the lore, because Skaven should be completely unreliable and should hate each other. But if you can ally in a Skaven faction on a campaign map, as any faction, you'll find yourself with one of the best allies you can imagine in a campaign. Like, look at these guys. Look at Clan Spittle. I took out one of Harkon's armies over here in Krokgar, sure, but they've done a lot of the heavy lifting as well here with multiple armies. Some of them have taken damage, absolutely, but they've got 2 full stacks, a third also work in progress, and they're not necessarily recruiting units right now. And I mean, granted, we've also benefited from Albric coming, and there's still a major army of Krokgar coming over here to deal with. But having powerful armies can make your campaign life that much easier. But there's more to it than that. There's more to it than that. So, what you get with Skrolk is you increase the hero capacity for Plague Priests, basically, and their recruit rank. And you also lower the upkeep cost for Plague Monks and Plague Catapults. Now, the upkeep for Plague Monks, not so significant. Catapults, of course. But being able to recruit those Plague Monks, well, let's just say that I'm running around here with 4 of them, and quite a few heroes as well. Because one of the big advantages Skaven have is being able to recruit a lot of heroes very early on. Because all they need for the hero capacity is a tier 3 structure, or even tier 2 if we're talking about assassins, for instance. Or, yeah, tier 2 for chieftains, tier 2 for assassins. Plague Priests might require a bit. Engineers certainly do require a bit more, of course. Engineers are pretty hard to get a hold of, absolutely. They do have events that give you at least potentially 1 Warlock Engineer. If you can get access to more, that's even better. But you do have a lot of hero options, in particular if you do own the DLC between Packmasters, Warlock Engineers, Sorcerers, all that. While obviously while obviously Plague Priests do have some issues, in particular their low armor, that's not necessarily so very significant in the environment they're operating here in Lustria. Because the only factions that have a great deal of range power are obviously Oxyatl and the High Elves over here at the Citadel of Dusk. Those are the only factions with significant range power. The other factions don't. Like Krokar, melee, obviously heavy melee lizardmen generally focused on melee as opposed to ranged. If they had powerful range, that would be a very big problem for Skaven in general, because Skaven with their low armor can certainly struggle in that situation. Though obviously the low armor will impact you even in a melee fight. What about the Vampire Coast? Well, they would be a problem if gunpowder units work properly. They don't, so they aren't really an issue at all, really. I mean, Luthor Harkon might seem like a monster, but given all the issues that ranged units and gunpowder units have in the game right now, they're a cakewalk for you to deal with. And those are some of the big advantages that Skrolk has, having allies, enemies that can't hold a candle to him. Like, he just being able to get a lot of heroes, far more so than your enemies will be able to, absolutely. And then there's the plagues. One of the major benefits that Skrolk has is that he increases the chance to spread a plague, and you also get benefit from plague. Now, some people have reported that this doesn't work. I'm not quite certain that it's fully working. I believe it is, at any rate. But you get the Skaven Plague. For you, it's a growth benefit, construction time, and income from old buildings, if you're playing as Skrolk. Now, that's pretty substantial, and because you can spread it so quickly, that's going to give you a lot of power. But the Skaven Plague is absolutely devastating to enemy armies. Now, understand that AI, especially on higher difficulties, has a significant resistance to attrition. And even they are taking quite a bit of damage from the plague over here. Like, their SARS or warriors are starting to decline from it. In fact, the Skaven Plague is one of the biggest nuisances to deal with if you're playing against Skaven. One of the things that I really dislike having to deal with when I am playing against Skaven is when inevitably, if you leave them alive long enough, let's say you're playing as Kislev and you leave Fraught alive long enough, they're going to use the plague, and that plague is going to be a nightmare because it's going to cause massive amounts of attrition. I mean, it causes a massive amount of attrition against AI, and that AI has a great deal of resistance to it. And, well, look at the situation here. I used the plague in Itza, right? And it's already spread to these two regions to the north in the army here. And it's quite likely going to spread even further north. So all the armies over here are going to start taking massive amounts of attrition. And when I take those territories myself, I'll get a massive growth and economic bonus that I can use. I've already got 3 armies in this campaign. And obviously this one is just a very cheap army, originally as a garrison force. To deal with one of Oxyatl's attack. Really, that was its purpose, so to speak. But now that that's sorted out, I've sent it all the way over here. So I rolled Lord Skrolk. In conclusion, while he does have a weak start, or rather a hard start, where you do have some very difficult early game battles, be it the Prophet, the Sentinels, the High Elves, and then of course Oxyatl. Those are difficult battles. But if you can manage those battles, if you can just survive and extend yourself in the first 10 turns of the campaign, and especially keep these Skaven alive to the south, then you can absolutely dominate the rest of the campaign. Having better plague benefit is actually a great deal of power to the Skaven. Having global recruitment for plague priests is a significant benefit. Having a diplomatic relation benefit with Skaven, also a pretty significant benefit as well. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and I'll see you boys and girls next time.